Let's go for it. We know that this month we celebrate Father's Day, which is, all of us know, the most important holiday of the year. But you know, as we look at the holidays, they tell us about traditions. And traditions certainly have their value to us. Traditions are how we have this continuity and how we keep track, in effect, of our lives and our societies. And it becomes a very significant part of all societies. When we were in England, and you know, I talked about that a little last time, we were at Cambridge and Oxford, and traditions, of course, are tremendously significant there. Benjamin talked about, our son at Cambridge talked about, when they go to dinner, the fellows, who are the instructors, eat at the high table. So the high table means a table that's set up on a platform like this. So if we were having our potluck, we'd have all the tables down there, but we would have one table up here, the high table. And when the fellows come in, everybody else has to stand up, and they come in and sit down, and they get a little better food and better wine, and then when they leave, it's the same thing. Everybody has to stand up, and they go out and go into a special room and have port and cigars. Traditions are kind of funny like that in the way they start and then they move on. And even though they have a purpose, the problem with tradition is what they're trying to do is hold on to the same things. And what life is about is changing. And we see that all of the time in our traditions. One of them I think is funny is Halloween. So what's Halloween about? Well, of course it's about little kids getting lots of candy. That's the important thing. And sometimes it's about adults getting to dress up like they wouldn't be somebody else. But of course it comes from All Hallows Eve, a celebration of the saints. But even before that, it comes from the one night of the year when the veil of the worlds is split apart and the dead are free to come out into the world of the living. And where are those dead going to go? Well, they're going to go to their house where they used to live. And it's very important that you honor them and that you had out snacks and drinks so that when they came, they would feel honored so they wouldn't curse you the rest of the year. And so you see, it's funny about that. How we do these things and we keep them going, but we no longer know what they mean. I've read about in some places priests who recite these chants, but they no longer know what they mean. But they learn those words over and over, and they do that. And that is a big part of Christianity, of having these traditions but not understanding what they really meant. Of course, we're talking about the teachings of Jesus. And, you know, there is no kingdom of God. There's no heaven that sets up in the sky somewhere that you're going to fly off to. There's no old man of God who's going to come down to earth physically and do things to change things. We know that all of those are misinterpretations. And to me, one of the most instructive, if you will, misinterpretations is Jesus teaching about light. And Jesus talks about light a lot in his teachings. You know, don't hide your light under a bushel. I am the light of the world. And from these ideas, you know, they painted the pictures, you see them all of the time, of Jesus glowing and angels with halos that glow and holy people who glow. And I kind of thought that might work for me. I'd get up in the night and go get a drink of water sometimes and end up stubbing my toe. If I was glowing, it would have really helped a lot. But as you know, what we always have to remember is Jesus was speaking Aramaic. You'd think he'd speak English, but he didn't. And when you translate that into English, it's not the same as like translating French into English, because even though they're different languages, they come from the same world view. But Aramaic is not only a different language, but it developed under a different world view. And so when Jesus is talking about light, and the word that he's using in Aramaic refers to that idea of light shining on things so that we can see them. And so the difference between light and dark is not the difference between good and evil. It's the difference between what we see, therefore what we know, and what we don't see, what's dark. As I was thinking about that, this example, let's say you were blindfolded. You'd never been in here before. You're blindfolded, somebody brings you in here. But all of the windows, all the doors, all the cracks are covered. And when you take off the blindfold, it's pitch dark. You cannot see anything. And they give you this thing with a feeble little light that you shine, but you shine it here and you start to walk and you fall over the chair. Well, we're not talking about good and evil. The chair wasn't attacking you as some evil being. We're talking about what you know, what you can see, and what you don't know. And that is a key, that you have to have this light that shines on things spiritually in order to know them. And Jesus said, a man of light, a person of light, will shine their light to the world. And if that light does not shine forth, there will be darkness. And what he's talking about is this light of spiritual knowledge. Now, as I thought of that, I thought, wow, that puts us in a difficult situation, because we can't learn spiritual truth until we already have this spiritual truth to shine forth. Sort of those circular trap sorts of things, which in itself teach us a very important spiritual truth. God has a very strange sense of humor. Keep that in mind at all times. But really, that issue, that problem, like so many others, is one of how we view the problem rather than the answer. Because what it is, as we all know really, is there's more than one type of knowledge. In English, we just have the word knowledge. But we know there are other types of knowledge. In Greek, they had several names, but the two here would be episteme and gnostis. And episteme, I don't speak Greek, so that may not be the correct pronunciation, is the technical knowledge. It's cognitive, intellectual knowledge of things. And that can be true in spirituality, that you need to have systems, techniques, and things you know. But there's also gnostis, the intuitive knowledge. And that's the type of knowledge that we're talking about here. That unless you have this inner spiritual sense, you're not going to be able to see the truth of any other spiritual teaching that you have. And Jesus said, and all of this is from the Gospel of Thomas, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. But if you do not bring that forth, what you do not bring forth will kill you. And of course, he's not talking about physical life and death, but spiritual. If you do not bring forth this light, this inner sense, this intuitive knowing of spirituality, you will never grow spiritually. You can do all of the training you want, you can go to all these techniques and read all of these books, But without that inner light to shine on them, they're always going to be unknown to you. And so, how do we get that inner light? And I think it comes from 3 steps: commitment, preparation, and acceptance. And so, commitment. You have to commit yourself to that. And what type of commitment am I talking about? I thought about that. How much commitment do we need? I mean, do we need to be committed to coming to the PLC once a week? Do we need to be committed to taking a class occasionally? If you want this inner light, I'm talking about a different type of commitment. I'm going to give you an example of a man, I think, who showed that kind of commitment in a different way, but this is the commitment I mean. He lived in Japan in the 1930s, and he told everyone he knew he was going to be great in making cars. He thought he really knew about cars and motors, and he was going to be great in that. And the reason he knew that is because he had a new design on a piston. And he was going to start with that piston and grow his car-making empire. And he was a young man, he was married, they had children. He was working 2 jobs to support them, but still working on this piston. And he worked on it for several years, 2-3 years. Took it to Toyota, who was the car maker there in Japan. Showed it to them, and they said, no, nothing here. Don't... You know, this isn't worth it. You know nothing about pistons. Go away. And he went back, and his friends laughed at him, and he said, no, I know this. I can do this. I'm committed to this. And he went back to work on it. And he hawked his wife's jewelry so he could have the money to work on. It doesn't tell us what his wife said. But he worked for 2 more years, got this piston made, took it to Toyota, and they said, wow, that is spectacular. You make these pistons and we'll buy them from you. Great, I just need to get a factory, I'll make the pistons and sell them. World War II was just starting, and the government had taken over all of the cement factories for the war effort. He can't make a factory. He's finally done it after years of work, but he can't make a factory. He gathered friends together. They came up with a new design on how to make cement so they could make it and they could make the factory. And he started making pistons and sold them to Toyota. And then as World War II came along, progressed, the Americans started bombing, and they bombed his factory. Only there were parts of it still there, and he gathered all of his people, and he said, we'll move all of this over here, and we'll work in this little space, and they kept making their pistons. Except, as it was getting bad for Japan, the government took over all of the raw materials. He could no longer make pistons. He worked all of that time, he built the factory, it got bombed, he still made it work, now he can't make it. And he went out and he looked at those bombers dropping bombs, but he noticed something else. Because the way they did it was they would drop their bombs, but they had extra gas tanks on the wings. So that they could fly there, they would use the gas out of those gas tanks, then they would drop those gas tanks and turn around and fly back because they're lighter now. And so he had his people go out and watch them bomb, and then watch where they drop the gas tanks, and go out and gather those up, huge metal tanks, spray them, do whatever they had to do to them, and go on making his pistons. This was commitment. The end of the war, there's an earthquake that destroyed his factory. And he sold it all off to Toyota. But now his family's having a hard time. They're out in the country. Gas is rationed.